The hum of the old refrigerator was the baseline of my life. It was a low, constant thrum that I only noticed when it stopped, plunging our tiny apartment into an unsettling silence. Most of the time, it was just there, a mechanical heartbeat for the small world I shared with my son, Sam. That evening, it felt louder than usual, a droning counterpoint to the frantic energy radiating from my phone. Mark's name glowed on the screen, his third call in 10 minutes. I knew what he wanted, and the answer was still no. I dried my hands on a worn dish towel, watching Sam at the small kitchen table. He was meticulously coloring a dinosaur, his tongue stuck out in concentration. At 6 years old, his world was wonderfully simple, made of sharp crayons and the absolute certainty that purple was the best color for a Tyrannosaurus Rex. My world was made of rent payments, grocery lists, and the quiet, gnawing fear of not being enough. There was no room in it for blind dates. Finally, I gave in and answered the phone, holding it away from my ear in anticipation. "Leo, thank God. You have to help me." Mark's voice was a croak, laced with genuine misery. "I think it's the flu. Or maybe the plague. I can't move. You said that last week about a head cold," I said, my voice low so I wouldn't disturb Sam's artistic focus. "This is different. I'm supposed to be meeting Julian Croft in an hour." "An hour, Leo? You can't just stand up Julian Croft. He's Julian Croft. My boss would kill me. The name meant nothing to me. It sounded like money, like the kind of name attached to buildings or charitable foundations. It was a name from a world so far removed from my own that it might as well have been on another planet. "So, reschedule," I said, stacking the clean plates. The chip on the edge of the top one felt like a familiar flaw, a part of the landscape. "You don't reschedule on a man like that. It took me 6 months to get this meeting. It's not even a meeting, it's the setup. My cousin's been trying to get us in the same room for ages." He coughed, a wet, theatrical sound. "Please, Leo, just go. Sit there for an hour. Have a nice meal. Tell him I had a family emergency. He'll never know the difference." The thought was absurd. "He'll know I'm not you, Mark. He's never met me. He's just seen a picture. We're both tall, dark hair, sad eyes. It's close enough. Just be charming, charming." I hadn't felt charming in years. I felt tired. The kind of tired that settles deep in your bones and makes your shoulders ache even when you're resting. But Mark was my friend, one of the few people who'd stuck around after everything fell apart, who brought over pizza and never judged the state of my apartment. And he sounded truly desperate. "1 hour," I said, the words tasting like a mistake before they were even fully formed. "And you owe me." A sigh of profound relief whispered through the phone. "Anything. You're a lifesaver." "The reservation is at Aria, 8 o'clock. Under Croft." He hung up before I could change my mind. I looked at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. Faded t-shirt, paint flecks on my jeans from a side job I'd done last weekend. Sad eyes. Mark had gotten that part right. This was a terrible idea. An hour later, I stood in front of a door that had no handle. It was just a seamless wall of dark, polished wood. A man in a suit, who looked more like a Secret Service agent than a host, opened it from the inside as I approached. The air that flowed out was cool and smelled of something I couldn't name, clean, expensive, like money itself had a scent. The restaurant was a cathedral of quiet confidence. Soft lighting glinted off dark wood and heavy silver. The murmur of conversation was so low it was like the building itself was breathing. Every person I saw looked like they belonged there, their clothes fitting perfectly, their posture relaxed and assured. I felt like a forgery, my one decent button-down shirt suddenly feeling thin and cheap, the collar a little too loose around my neck. I gave the name, Croft, and was led through the hushed space to a secluded booth in the back. A man was already sitting there, his back to me. All I could see was a perfectly tailored dark gray suit and a head of silver-streaked dark hair, cut with razor precision. He didn't look up as I approached. He was studying the wine list with the same intensity Sam gave his dinosaurs. I cleared my throat. "Mr. Croft." He looked up, and the world tilted slightly on its axis. The picture Mark had sent me hadn't done him justice. It had shown a handsome, serious-looking man in his late 40s. It had not captured the weight of his presence. His eyes were a cool, clear gray, like a winter sky, and they took in everything about me in a single, sweeping glance. I felt my worn collar, the slight fraying at my cuffs, the anxiety tightening my shoulders, all being cataloged and filed away. There was no warmth in his expression, just a calm, unnerving assessment. "You are not Mark," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was a low baritone, smooth and measured. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed. My carefully constructed lie crumbled into dust before I'd even had a chance to speak it. My face flushed with heat. "No, I'm not." He gestured to the seat opposite him. The movement was small, economical, but it was an undeniable command. I slid into the leather booth, the materials sighing softly under my weight. "My name is Leo. Mark is sick." He felt terrible about canceling, and he asked me to come in his place to explain. The words came out in a rush, sounding flimsy and foolish in the oppressive quiet of the restaurant. Julian Croft placed the wine list carefully on the table, aligning its edge perfectly with the edge of the table. His hands were clean, his nails immaculate. Strong hands. Capable. He didn't seem angry or even annoyed. He just seemed observant, like a scientist studying a new and unexpected specimen. "I see," he said, his gray eyes fixed on mine. "And what, precisely, were you meant to explain?" "That he's very sorry, and that he's not a flake. He has the plague," I said, and then immediately winced. The flu. A very bad flu. For the first time, something shifted in his expression. It wasn't a smile, not even close. But the corner of his mouth ticked up by a millimeter. A flicker of something that might have been amusement. "The plague," he repeated, his voice flat. "That would be a considerable family emergency." A waiter appeared at his elbow, silent as a ghost. Julian ordered a bottle of wine without consulting me, the name a string of French syllables I didn't recognize. He didn't ask if I wanted any. He just assumed. It should have been arrogant, but somehow it just felt efficient. "Well, Leo," he said, his gaze returning to me. "Since you are here, and I am here, and Mark is busy battling a medieval disease, you may as well have dinner again." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. I opened my mouth to refuse, to make my excuses and flee back to my world of humming refrigerators and crayon masterpieces. But his eyes held mine, and there was a quiet intensity in them that made it impossible to look away. It wasn't a challenge. It felt more like a genuine, if detached, curiosity. He wanted to see what I would do. And for some reason I couldn't explain, I wanted to know, too. "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He gave a single, brief nod. And then he picked up his menu, the brief flicker of connection gone, leaving me alone with the silence and the unnerving feeling that I had just stepped through a door into a room where I didn't know any of the rules. Dinner was a strange, dislocated experience. The food was incredible, flavors so complex and perfectly balanced that they felt like a new language on my tongue. I ate slowly, trying to memorize the taste of things I knew I would never eat again. Julian ate with a quiet, focused grace, his movements precise and unhurried. He didn't talk much at first. He asked questions. They weren't the usual small-talk questions. He didn't ask what I did for a living, at least not directly. He asked what I thought about the city's new zoning proposal for downtown. He asked for my opinion on a recent article in The Atlantic. He asked questions that required actual thought, and he listened to my answers with that same still, unnerving attention. He made me feel intelligent. He made me feel seen. It was terrifying. I found myself being more honest than I had been with anyone in years. I told him about my old job as an architectural draftsman before the firm downsized and my life took a sharp left turn. I talked about my passion for old buildings, for the history and the stories held in their brick and mortar. I didn't mention Sam. I didn't mention the part-time job stocking shelves and delivering groceries. I kept a whole section of my life locked away, a small, worn-out room he wasn't allowed to see. His own answers were brief and factual. He ran an investment firm. He sat on several boards. He restored historical properties as a hobby. The word hung in the air between us, highlighting the chasm that separated our lives. My passion was his pastime. "You have a good eye for structure," he commented after I'd spent 5 minutes dissecting the flaws in a new glass and steel skyscraper that had just gone up. "A practical sense of how things fit together, I used to," I said, taking a sip of the wine. It was smooth and rich, warming me from the inside out. Now I mostly have a good eye for which brand of canned beans is on sale. It was a bitter little joke, and I regretted it the moment it left my lips. It was too raw, too revealing. I was showing him the worn seams of my life. I expected him to recoil, to retreat behind his wall of cool indifference. Instead, he just watched me over the rim of his glass. "Practical skills are never wasted," he said, his voice even. "They just find new applications." There was no pity in his tone. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered with the same calm authority he seemed to apply to everything. And for some reason, it felt more comforting than any platitude could have been. When the check came, he handled it without looking at the total. The gesture was so casual, so utterly devoid of the anxiety that accompanied every single transaction in my life, that it felt like a form of magic. As we stood to leave, he paused. "It was an unexpected evening, Leo," he said. "I'm sorry it wasn't the one you were planning," I replied, my hands shoved deep in my pockets. "I have very few evenings that are not planned," he said, his gray eyes meeting mine. "Unexpected can be refreshing." He walked me to the door, a silent, imposing presence at my side. Outside, the night air was cool and damp. A sleek black car, the kind that purrs instead of rumbles, was waiting at the curb. A driver stood holding the rear door open. "Let me give you a ride," Julian offered. "No, thank you," I said, maybe a little too quickly. "The bus stop is just around the corner." The idea of this man, this car, this entire world, seeing the shabby entrance to my apartment building was more than I could handle. I needed to get back to my own territory, to the familiar hum of the refrigerator and the comforting mess of Sam's crayons. He didn't push. He just nodded. "Very well. Good night, Leo." He got into the car, and it pulled away from the curb with a whisper of power, disappearing into the city lights. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time, the warmth of the wine fading, leaving me with the chill of the night and the bewildering memory of his cool, assessing gaze. For the next 3 days, I replayed the dinner in my head on a continuous loop. I dissected every word, every gesture, every long, weighted silence. I tried to decipher the man behind the expensive suit and the impenetrable calm. I told myself it was just a strange, isolated event, a brief glimpse into another universe. A story I could tell Mark once he recovered from his plague, but I couldn't shake the feeling of his attention. For one evening, I had been the sole focus of a man who probably had the world clamoring for a piece of his time. He had listened to me. He had taken me seriously. It was a feeling I hadn't realized I was starving for. On the 4th day, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I have a property I'm restoring downtown. An old brownstone. I remember what you said about foundational supports in buildings of that era. I would be interested in your opinion, if you are available." There was no name, but I knew who it was. The language was precise, formal, all business. It wasn't an invitation to a date. It was a consultation. An offer of work? It was a lifeline disguised as a casual inquiry. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a way for him to see me again without crossing any lines, without making any assumptions. It was clever. It was considerate. And it was irresistible. I typed back a reply, my fingers fumbling slightly. "I'm available." The brownstone was magnificent. Even shrouded in scaffolding and covered in a fine layer of dust, its bones were good. It stood on a quiet, tree-lined street, a relic of a more elegant time. Julian was already there when I arrived, standing in the gutted shell of the first floor, talking to a contractor. He was dressed more casually today, in dark trousers and a soft, charcoal gray cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He looked less like a corporate titan and more like a university professor. A very, very wealthy professor. He saw me and ended his conversation, walking over to meet me. The contractor gave me a curious glance, a flicker of, "Who is this guy?" in his eyes before he turned away. "Leo, thank you for coming," Julian said. His voice was the same low, steady rumble, but in the echoing space of the old house, it sounded warmer. "This place is incredible," I said, my gaze sweeping upwards towards the high ceilings, the ghost of a grand staircase still visible against a stripped wall. "It will be," he said, "if we can solve the issue with the western wall." It's bowing slightly. The engineers have a solution, but it feels brutish. Steel beams. It would destroy the integrity of the original design. He led me through the space, pointing out structural details, explaining the challenges. He treated me like a colleague, a peer whose opinion he genuinely valued. I forgot to be nervous. I was in my element, my old training kicking in. I ran my hands over the cool, dusty plaster, peered into the dark cavity where a fireplace used to be, and felt a part of myself I thought was long dead flicker back to life. We spent over an hour walking through the house, from the damp, earthy-smelling basement to the airy top floor where sunlight streamed through grimy windows. I talked, pointing out signs of water damage, suggesting alternative methods of reinforcement that would be less invasive, sketching ideas on a dusty plank with a piece of chalk I found on the floor. And he listened. He watched me with that same quiet intensity, but this time it didn't feel unnerving. It felt focused, appreciative. As we were walking back down the makeshift stairs, I stumbled on a loose board. I flailed for a second, my arms windmilling, before a strong hand clamped down on my shoulder, steadying me. "Careful." Julian's voice was low, right by my ear. His hand was warm and heavy on my shoulder. It wasn't a fleeting touch. He kept it there for a moment longer than necessary, a solid, grounding pressure that sent a jolt of heat through my entire body. I could feel the strength in his grip, the controlled power. It was a simple, protective gesture, but it felt profoundly intimate. My breath caught in my throat. I am standing perfectly still. The weight of his hand is a small, warm anchor in a suddenly turbulent sea. My mind, which had been so clear, so focused on joists and load-bearing walls, is now a complete blank. All I can think about is the heat of his palms seeping through the thin fabric of my jacket. I can smell the faint, clean scent of his sweater, something like cedar and cold air. He removes his hand, and the absence of his touch is as startling as its presence had been. The air rushes back into my lungs. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice sounding strained. "The place is a death trap," he said, his expression unreadable. He turned and continued down the stairs, his movements as steady and sure-footed as ever. But I saw it, just for a second, a flicker of something in his eyes, a brief, unguarded moment where the cool gray warmed by a degree. The interaction had shifted something between us. The professional pretext had dissolved, leaving something more personal and uncertain in its wake. We finished the tour in a new kind of silence, one that was no longer comfortable but crackling with unspoken tension. Back on the main floor, he turned to me. "Your ideas are excellent, far more elegant than what was proposed. I'd like to hire you as a consultant on this project, to oversee the structural restoration. You can name your price." The offer was a life raft. It was a way out of the constant, grinding anxiety of my financial situation. It was independence. It was a chance to do the work I loved again. It was also a way for him to keep me in his orbit. I knew that. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. I hesitated, my mind racing. The power imbalance between us was a vast, yawning canyon. He was offering me a job. He was a billionaire who could buy and sell my entire life without a second thought. And I was me. "Is that a problem?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "No," I said, finding my voice. "It's not a problem. Thank you. I'd like that very much. I needed this. For me. For Sam. I could handle the rest." I had to. I walked home that day feeling like I was floating. The world seemed sharper, the colors brighter. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a dark, narrow tunnel. It felt like an open door. Over the next few weeks, we settled into a new routine. I would spend 3 days a week at the brownstone, meeting with the contractors, reviewing plans, and supervising the delicate work of reinforcing the old structure. Julian was often there, his presence a quiet, steadying force in the background. He would watch me work, asking insightful questions, his respect for my expertise obvious. We rarely talked about anything personal. Our conversations were about the project, about the history of the building, about the challenges of marrying old craftsmanship with new technology. But underneath the professional surface, the tension simmered. I was constantly aware of him. I felt the weight of his gaze when I was explaining something to the foreman. I noticed the way his eyes would soften slightly when I got excited about a particular architectural detail. He learned my coffee order, black, 2 sugars, and would have one waiting for me when I arrived in the mornings. He noticed when I was starting to fade in the afternoon and would insist I take a break. They were small things, tiny acts of care disguised as professional courtesy, but I saw them for what they were. I saw him taking care of me, and I was falling for him. It was a slow, quiet, inevitable slide. It wasn't just about the money or the security he represented. It was about the man himself, the quiet strength, the sharp, curious mind. the unexpected gentleness that he tried so hard to hide beneath a stoic exterior. I was drawn to the man who listened more than he spoke, who saw the value in things others overlooked, whether it was an old, crumbling building or a down-on-his-luck single dad. But I kept my own walls up, high and fortified. He still didn't know about Sam. The thought of bringing my son into this strange, fragile new world I was building with Julian filled me with a deep, primal fear. Sam was my heart, walking around outside my body. He was the one thing in my life that was pure and good, and I would protect him from anything, including my own foolish, hopeful heart. One rainy Tuesday, the tipping point came. I got a call from Sam's school. He had a fever and needed to be picked up immediately. My shift at the grocery store started in an hour. My neighbor, who was my usual emergency backup, wasn't answering her phone. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I was at the brownstone, in the middle of a meeting with Julian and the lead engineer. I tried to excuse myself quietly, but Julian's perceptive gaze missed nothing. "Is everything all right, Leo?" he asked, his voice cutting through the engineer's technical explanation. "I'm sorry, I have to go," I said, my voice tight with stress. "It's a family emergency," the same weak excuse Mark had used. It felt pathetic coming out of my mouth. Julian's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He followed me as I grabbed my jacket. "What kind of emergency?" he asked, his tone low and calm, a stark contrast to the frantic buzzing in my head. I hesitated. The secret felt heavy and shameful. "My son. He's sick. I have to pick him up from school." The words hung in the air between us. I waited for the flicker of annoyance, the polite withdrawal. A child was a complication, a messy, unpredictable variable in his well-ordered world. Julian was silent for a long moment. He looked at my face, at the undisguised panic in my eyes. Then he simply nodded. "All right," he said. "My car is outside. Let's go." It wasn't a question. He took my arm, a firm, reassuring grip just above the elbow, and steered me towards the door. The engineer was left standing alone, mid-sentence. The ride to the school was a blur. I gave his driver the address, my mind racing through a dozen disastrous scenarios. What if I lost my job at the store? How would I pay for a doctor? Julian didn't speak. He just sat beside me in the cavernous back seat of the car, a silent, solid presence. He didn't offer empty reassurances. He just was there. When we pulled up to the school, he got out of the car with me. "Wait here," I said, a fresh wave of panic rising. "I'll be right back. I'm coming with you," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. I walked into the nurse's office with a billionaire in a bespoke suit trailing behind me. It felt like a scene from a bizarre dream. Sam was lying on a small cot, his face flushed, his eyes glassy. He looked so small and miserable. My heart clenched. He saw me, and his face crumpled. "Daddy," he whimpered. I scooped him up, his little body hot and limp against my chest. He buried his face in my neck. All my anxiety, all my fear about Julian and our complicated dynamic evaporated. All that mattered was the small, sick boy in my arms. I turned to leave and found Julian standing in the doorway, watching us. The cool, detached mask was gone. In its place was an expression I couldn't quite read. It was soft, unguarded, and achingly tender. He was looking at me holding my son, and for the first time, I felt like he was seeing all of me. The tired, struggling father. The man with a life outside of their shared project. He didn't say a word. He just held the door open for us. Back in the car, Sam was shivering, despite his fever. Without a word, Julian took off his suit jacket, a piece of clothing that probably cost more than my car used to, and draped it over Sam's small body. Sam snuggled into the impossibly soft wool and promptly fell asleep. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. Julian just looked at me, his gray eyes searching my face. "You should have told me you had a son." It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, tinged with something that sounded like hurt. "I know," I said, looking down at Sam's sleeping face. I was afraid of what? That it would be too much. Too complicated, that you would run, I thought. That you would see me not as a competent professional, but as a charity case with baggage. He was silent for the rest of the ride to my apartment. When we arrived, he insisted on carrying a still sleeping Sam upstairs. I watched him move through my small, cluttered living room, his large frame seeming to shrink the space around him. He laid Sam gently on the couch, tucking his own expensive jacket around him like a blanket. He turned to face me in the quiet apartment. The only sounds the hum of the refrigerator and Sam's soft, feverish breathing. "Nothing about you is a complication, Leo," he said, his voice low and firm. "It is simply a fact, and a rather wonderful one." It seems he looked from me to my son, and the tenderness in his expression was so profound it made my chest ache. He wasn't just looking at Sam. He was looking at my whole life, the messy, beautiful, difficult parts one had tried so hard to hide, and he wasn't turning away. He was stepping closer. In the aftermath of that day, the dynamic between us shifted irrevocably. The unspoken was now spoken. He knew about Sam. He had seen my life, my real life, and he hadn't flinched. If anything, he had drawn nearer, his quiet acts of care becoming more frequent and less disguised by professional necessity. He arranged for a doctor to make a house call, a calm, kind woman who treated Sam with gentle efficiency and left behind medicine that worked like a charm. He had groceries delivered, a mountain of healthy food and Sam's favorite fruit juices, with a note that simply said, "Focus on him." He never once made it feel like charity. He made it feel like support, like something a partner would do. When Sam was better, Julian asked if he could see him again. Properly. I hesitated for a day, my fear warring with my hope. But I saw the genuine interest in his eyes, the quiet respect he had shown me and my son. I said yes. He came over on a Saturday afternoon. He didn't come bearing expensive, ostentatious gifts. He brought a complex Lego set, one designed to build a detailed replica of a famous bridge. He sat on the floor with Sam, his long legs folded awkwardly under my small coffee table, and for 2 hours, they worked on it together. I watched them from the kitchen, my heart doing a slow, painful turn in my chest. Julian was patient and calm, letting Sam take the lead, offering quiet suggestions, never once growing frustrated. He treated my 6-year-old son with the same focused respect he gave to his engineers. He saw the smart, funny, wonderful little person Sam was. Later, after Sam was in bed, Julian and I sat in the quiet living room. The Lego bridge sat half-finished on the table, a testament to the afternoon's quiet success. "He's a great kid, Leo," Julian said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "He is," I agreed, a lump forming in my throat. Julian looked at me, his expression serious. "I am aware," he began, his words chosen with his usual care, "of the disparity in our circumstances. I know how this might look to you, or to others. I need you to understand that my interest in you, and in Sam, has nothing to do with that. I hope I have not overstepped." It was an extraordinary admission. He was acknowledging the power imbalance, the potential for his help to be misconstrued as control. He was giving me an out, making it clear that my comfort and my agency were his priority. He was showing me his own vulnerability, his own fear that he might be doing this wrong. This is it. This is the moment where I can retreat back into the safety of my small, lonely world, where I can take a step forward into something unknown and terrifying and beautiful. "You haven't overstepped," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "You've been a friend. I would like to be more than that," he said, his gray eyes holding mine. The words were simple, direct, and utterly devastating in their honesty. If that is something you would want, the air grew thick, charged with years of my own unspoken yearning. Here was a man who saw me, all of me, and wanted more. He wasn't trying to save me. He was trying to join me. My fear of rejection, of not being enough, was a cold, familiar weight in my stomach. But the hope he offered was a steady warmth, spreading through my chest, pushing the fear aside. I am no longer just Leo, the struggling single dad. In his eyes, I am Leo, the man with a good eye for structure, the man with a wonderful son, the man he wants. "Yes," I said. The word was a breath, a release. "That is something I would want." A slow, beautiful smile spread across his face. It transformed him, erasing the last traces of the cool, intimidating stranger I had met weeks ago, revealing the warm, steady man who had patiently built a bridge, both with Lego bricks and with my own guarded heart. The next week, my ex-partner, David, showed up. He had a sixth sense for when things in my life were starting to look up, a magnetic attraction to the possibility of drama. He appeared at the brownstone during my workday, his presence a jarring note of chaos in the ordered calm Julian and I had created. "So this is the new sugar daddy," David said, his voice laced with a familiar, sneering contempt. He looked around the half-finished, elegant space, his eyes landing on Julian, who was standing by the far window, reviewing his set of blueprints. Traded up, I see. Good for you, Leo. Always knew you were ambitious. My blood ran cold. Shame and anger coiled in my gut. I had worked so hard to build a new life, a new sense of self-respect, and here was my past, trying to tear it all down with a few careless, cruel words. You need to leave, David, I said, my voice shaking slightly. Oh, I'm just saying hello. Wanted to see how my son is doing. You know, the one you're raising with this guy's money. He gestured vaguely at Julian. Before I could respond, Julian moved. He didn't rush. He folded the blueprints with deliberate calm, placed them on a stack of lumber, and walked towards us. His face was impassive, a mask of cool neutrality, but there was a dangerous stillness in his eyes. He stopped a few feet away, his presence alone a formidable barrier. He didn't look at David. He looked at me. Leo, he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in my sea of turmoil. Is this man bothering you? The question was simple, but the subtext was monumental. He was giving the power back to me. He wasn't fighting my battle for me. He was standing with me, ready to follow my lead. Yes, I said, my voice finding its strength. He is. Julian's gaze shifted to David. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Then you will leave, he said. It was not a request. It was a law of nature. You will not come to this property again, and you will not speak to Leo in that manner again. Is that understood? David, who had always thrived on bluster and intimidation, seemed to shrink under the weight of Julian's quiet, absolute authority. He sputtered for a moment, then seemed to think better of it. He shot me a look of pure venom, and then turned and stalked out of the building. The silence he left behind was heavy. I stood there, trembling with adrenaline and residual shame. I couldn't look at Julian. I felt exposed, my messy, complicated past laid bare for him to see. I'm sorry, I whispered to the floorboards. You shouldn't have had to see that. A warm hand came to rest on my shoulder. The same steadying, grounding touch from that first day on the stairs. You have nothing to apologize for, Julian said, his voice gentle. He turned me to face him, his other hand coming up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. That man is a part of your past. He is not a part of your future. His eyes searched mine, full of a fierce, protective light. I am not ashamed of you, Leo. I am in awe of you, of the father you are, of the man you are. Despite people like him, the sincerity in his voice broke through my defenses. I felt the sting of tears behind my eyes, tears of relief and a profound, overwhelming gratitude. He had seen the ugliest part of my story and had not only stood by me, but had defended my honor, my worth, with a quiet, unshakable strength. What we are building here, he said, his gaze sweeping around the beautiful, reviving old house, is about more than just wood and stone. It's about creating something strong, something safe. He looked back at me. What I want to build with you is the same. His words were a promise, a foundation. He was telling me that he was in this, for all of it. The good, the bad, the messy. The distance between us had vanished. All that was left was the warmth of his hands on my skin, the steady look in his gray eyes, and the undeniable truth of what was happening between us. The subtext was gone. Everything was on the surface, clear and honest and real. I think about you, I confessed, the words tumbling out, raw and unplanned. All the time, even when I'm not here. You're just there, the corner of his mouth tilted up in that rare, beautiful smile. Good, he said, his voice a low murmur. Because my thoughts have been occupied by you and your son since the night we met. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. I met him halfway, my eyes fluttering shut as his lips met mine. The kiss was not what I expected. There was no desperate passion, no frantic claiming. It was soft. It was unbelievably gentle. It was a question and an answer all at once. It tasted of coffee and dust and a profound, soul-deep rightness. It was a quiet confirmation, a sealing of the promise he had just made. His lips were warm and firm, moving against mine with a patient, unhurried tenderness that spoke of a man who was confident enough not to rush. My hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid beat of his heart under my palms. It was as steady and reliable as he was. He pulled me closer, one hand sliding from my jaw to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair. The kiss deepened slightly, a sigh of contentment passing between us. It felt like coming home, a home I hadn't even known I was searching for. When he finally pulled back, he didn't go far. He rested his forehead against mine, our breath mingling in the cool, dusty air. His gray eyes, now dark with emotion, searched my face. "Leo," he whispered, his voice thick. I couldn't speak. I just leaned into his touch, into the solid, grounding presence of him, and let myself feel the quiet, overwhelming joy of being found. We stood there for a long time, in the heart of the house we were rebuilding, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that we were rebuilding our lives, too, together. The next morning, I woke up with a familiar, unwelcome guest, anxiety. It sat on my chest, a cold, heavy weight. The reality of the previous day, of that kiss, came crashing in with the pale morning light. What had I done? What did this mean? Julian Croft was a billionaire. He lived in a world of private cars, exclusive restaurants, and tailored suits. I lived in a world of bus schedules, clearance racks, and a humming refrigerator that might die at any moment. The kiss had felt right, had felt like the most real thing that had ever happened to me. But in the harsh light of day, it felt like a fantasy, a beautiful, impossible dream. I imagined what people would say, the whispers, the judgments. I would be seen as a gold digger, a charity case, a project Julian had taken on. My independence, the one thing I had fought so hard to maintain, felt fragile, threatened. When I saw him at the brownstone later that morning, I was quiet, withdrawn. I busied myself with blueprints, avoiding his gaze, putting a careful, professional distance between us. I was retreating into my shell, my old self-preservation instincts kicking in. He noticed, of course. He noticed everything. He didn't push or pry. He simply watched me with his usual calm, perceptive eyes. He let me have my space. At the end of the day, as I was packing up to leave, he approached me. "Walk with me," he said. It wasn't a command, but a quiet invitation. We walked in silence for a few blocks, the city bustling around us. He led me to a small, quiet park I'd never seen before, a hidden green oasis tucked between tall buildings. We sat on a bench, the late afternoon sun slanting through the trees. "You're worried," he stated, looking at the pigeons pecking at the ground. I didn't deny it. I just nodded, tracing a pattern on the dusty ground with the toe of my boot. "About the money," he continued. "About what people will think. About what this makes you." He understood completely. He saw right through me. The realization was both comforting and unnerving. He turned to me, his expression earnest. "Leo, your financial situation is a circumstance. It is not who you are. The work you are doing for me, you have earned every penny of your salary. Your expertise is valuable. That is a professional transaction, and it will remain so. I would never compromise your integrity that way." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "What is happening between us, that is personal. It has nothing to do with your bank account and everything to do with your character, with your strength, your kindness, your mind, and the incredible father you are." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. He handed it to me. "I know that words are not always enough. I want to propose something." I opened the folder. Inside was a proposal. It was for the creation of a new, permanent position within his company's charitable foundation, Director of Historical Preservation. The role would involve identifying and overseeing the restoration of historically significant buildings in underserved communities, turning them into community centers, libraries, or affordable housing. The salary listed was more than I had ever made in my life, even at my old firm. It was a real job, a perfect job, a job that was tailor-made for my skills and my passions. "This is a legitimate need within my foundation," he said, his voice steady. "I have been looking for the right person to lead this initiative for over a year. That person is you. This has nothing to do with us, personally. I would be offering this to you even if you had told me to get lost yesterday." I looked at the papers, then back at his face. He meant it. This wasn't a handout. It was an opportunity. A respectful, legitimate offer that would give me the financial independence I so desperately craved. It would separate our professional and personal lives with a clear, undeniable line. He was not just reassuring me with words. He was giving me a practical, tangible solution to the very thing that was causing my anxiety. He was protecting my independence. He was protecting me from my own fears. This would mean, he continued, that you are my employee. At the foundation. Not here. Not personally. We would have to be discreet, at first. For your sake, and for Sam's. But our personal relationship would be just that. Ours. Separate. Built on its own terms. Tears pricked my eyes again. He had thought of everything. He had anticipated my fears, and had already built a structure to alleviate them. He wasn't trying to absorb me into his world. He was creating a space where our worlds could meet as equals. Okay, I said, my voice choked with emotion. Yes, okay. He took my hand, his fingers lacing with mine. The touch was warm, solid, a silent promise. We will take it one day at a time, Leo. We will build this on a foundation of honesty and respect. I will never give you a reason to feel like anything less than my partner, sitting there on that park bench, with the official job offer in my lap and his hand in mine. The cold weight of anxiety finally lifted, replaced by a steady, hopeful warmth. He wasn't just a fantasy. He was real. And so was this. A few weeks later, we faced our first real test. Julian's foundation was hosting a small, relatively low-key fundraising dinner for a new literacy program. He asked me to come as his guest. It wasn't a splashy gala, but it would be the first time we would appear in a public, social setting together. I was a nervous wreck. I bought a new suit, my first in years, from a department store. It felt stiff and foreign on my body. As I got ready, I kept looking at myself in the mirror, seeing only the tired single dad from the rundown apartment, playing dress-up. When Julian picked me up, he didn't say anything about my ill-fitting suit or my obvious anxiety. He just smiled, his eyes warm and reassuring. You look handsome, he said, and the simple, sincere words were enough to calm the frantic beating of my heart. The event was held in a beautifully restored art gallery. The room was filled with the quiet murmur of polite conversation and the clinking of glasses. It was a world of understated wealth and influence, and I felt every single one of my insecurities rise to the surface. I was acutely aware of the curious glances cast our way, the whispers behind raised hands. I could almost hear them. Who is that with Julian Croft? I felt my shoulders tense, my instinct to shrink and become invisible taking over. Then, I felt Julian's hand, a warm, steady pressure on the small of my back. It was a subtle gesture, almost unnoticeable to anyone else, but to me, it was everything. It was an anchor. It said, I am here. We are in this together. He guided me through the room, introducing me to a few of his colleagues. He didn't introduce me as his new employee or his new project. He just said, this is Leo, his voice calm and proud, as if my name alone was all the explanation anyone needed. He included me in conversations, turning to me for my opinion, making it clear that I was not just an accessory, but a partner. Halfway through the evening, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper smile approached us. Julian, darling, she said, her gaze flicking over me with cool appraisal. You've been keeping secrets, Eleanor, Julian said, his tone polite but distant. This is Leo. Leo, this is Eleanor Vance. She sits on the museum board, a pleasure, Eleanor said, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. So, Leo, what is it that you do? The question was a classic of the genre, a polite way of sizing me up, of placing me in the social hierarchy. Before I could stammer out an answer about my new, not yet started job, Julian spoke. Leo is one of the most brilliant architectural minds I've ever met, he said, his voice smooth as silk, his hand never leaving my back. He has a gift for seeing the soul of a building. He's overseeing the restoration of my brownstone on Alastair Street. He had framed my value in terms of my talent, my passion. He had defined me by my strengths, not my circumstances. He had done it so effortlessly, so naturally, that it left no room for Eleanor's probing. She was visibly impressed, her expression shifting from dismissive curiosity to genuine interest. We navigated the rest of the evening as a team. Every time I felt a wave of anxiety, Julian would be there with a quiet word, a reassuring touch, a look that said he saw me, and he was proud to be standing next to me. He was my shield and my anchor. Later, on the ride home, I was quiet. Was that so bad? Julian asked gently. It was okay, I admitted. You made it okay, we made it okay, he corrected me softly. Together, he was right. We had faced the whispers and the judging eyes, and we had come through it. Our nascent relationship had been tested, and it had held firm. The foundation we were building was stronger than I thought. When we got back to my apartment, I invited him in. Sam was at Mark's for the night, a rare sleepover. The apartment was quiet, still. In the soft glow of the living room lamp, I looked at him, really looked at him. The powerful billionaire, the stoic protector. And I saw the man who had defended me, supported me, and believed in me. "Thank you," I said, my voice full of an emotion I couldn't name. "There is no need to thank me for wanting to be with you, Leo," he said. And this time, when he kissed me, there was no hesitation, no fear. There was just the quiet, certain joy of two people who had found their way home. We began to build a life, piece by piece, with the same care and intention we were giving the old brownstone. We established routines, boundaries. My new job at the foundation was a real, demanding position that gave me a sense of purpose and financial stability I hadn't felt in years. Julian was my boss's boss's boss, a distant figurehead in my professional life, which created the clean separation we both needed. Our personal life was something we built in the quiet moments. He would come over for dinner at my apartment, sitting at my small, wobbly kitchen table, eating the simple meals I cooked. He never complained or compared it to the fine dining he was used to. He just seemed happy to be there, to be part of the messy, normal rhythm of my life with Sam. We took things slowly, always with Sam's well-being as our guiding star. Julian never tried to be a replacement father. He was just Julian, a steady, kind, and fascinating presence in Sam's life. He taught Sam how to play chess. They built elaborate structures out of blocks. They would sit together on the couch, reading, in a comfortable silence that felt more like family than anything I had ever known. One Sunday morning, I woke up in Julian's house for the first time. I had spent the night, another quiet milestone. His home was as beautiful and ordered as I had imagined, a modern masterpiece of glass and stone overlooking the city. But it felt less like a house and more like a museum. It was cool, quiet, and impersonal. It was the home of a man who had been alone for a very long time. I padded into the kitchen, following the smell of coffee. Julian was standing at the counter, wearing a simple t-shirt and sweatpants, looking impossibly soft and domestic. He was making pancakes. From scratch. "You cook?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe, a smile playing on my lips. He turned, and the smile he gave me was warm and unguarded. "There are many things you don't know about me, Leo." We ate breakfast together at a large, empty dining table, the morning sun streaming in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The silence was comfortable, easy. It felt like a Sunday morning should feel. "This house is beautiful," I said. "But it doesn't feel like you." He looked around, as if seeing it for the first time. "It was designed to be impressive," he admitted. "A place to host events and project an image. It has never really felt like a home." Later that day, we went back to my apartment. The moment we walked in, Sam, who had just gotten back from his sleepover, ran to Julian, throwing his arms around his legs in a fierce hug. "Julian, we finished the Lego bridge. Come see." Julian's face softened with a look of pure, unadulterated joy. He knelt down, meeting Sam at his level, and let my son drag him over to the coffee table to admire their creation. I stood in the doorway of my small, cluttered, imperfect apartment, and watched the man I loved sit on my worn rug, his head bent close to my son's, their voices a low, happy murmur as they discussed the structural integrity of a toy bridge. The room was filled with the smell of crayons and peanut butter and the faint, ever-present hum of the old refrigerator. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was home. It wasn't a place. It wasn't about money or beautiful architecture. It was this quiet, simple moment of connection. This feeling of belonging. Julian looked up and caught my eye. He smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached deep into his cool gray eyes and warmed them from within. In that look, I saw our future. It wouldn't be perfect. It would be complicated. We would have to navigate our different worlds, the judgments of others, the challenges of blending our lives. But we would do it together. We would build it on a foundation of respect, honesty, and a quiet, steady love that had taken root in the most unexpected of circumstances. I was no longer afraid. The constant, low-grade anxiety that had been the soundtrack to my life for so long had faded, replaced by a quiet confidence. I was not a project to be fixed or a charity case to be saved. I was a partner, an equal, a man who was loved for exactly who he was. I walked over and sat on the floor beside them, adding a final piece to the top of their bridge. It clicked perfectly into place. Strong, secure, built to last. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.